It's no secret that Newcastle is home to some of the most vibrant culture, nightlife, art and business in the north of England and, indeed, the whole country. It has more independent restaurants per capita than anywhere else outside London, local bosses say, and is bucking the national trend on footfall thanks to its thriving nighttime economy. But with our relationship with our town and city centres shifting in recent years, and very rapidly since the pandemic, will places like Newcastle need to adapt if they're to stay vibrant for the coming decades? One man who probably knows the answer to that is Stephen Patterson, the CEO of Newcastle NE1. That is the biggest example in the country of a business improvement district where businesses pay an additional tax or levy to fund local projects to boost the economy. So I really want to hear, Stephen, more about what's going on in Newcastle and how cities can sort of work within themselves to become a success. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. So I mentioned how Newcastle was bucking the national trend on footfall. Can you just give us a bit of a sort of a picture about how the city centre is doing in terms of, you know, getting people back in post-pandemic, I guess based on the data and also sort of the anecdotal evidence that you've seen?
I think obviously over the past few years, the pandemic really has been the big game changer, not just for Newcastle, but all cities. And certainly for us, we're really doing very well in terms of footfall. So at the minute, we're 6% up year on year. And when you look at the stats, you know, we're 16.5% better than the national average. And the staggering 52% better than our northeast average. So we're doing really well. I think the reasons for that are Newcastle is quite a small, compact city. So we're really easy to get in and out of. So for the most part, we haven't really had that big pushback from office employees about coming back into the office because they're not having to do sort of, you know, hour, 2 hour commutes every day to come into Newcastle. So we haven't really seen that pushback. And you mentioned in your introduction as well, we have a really vibrant nighttime economy and cultural sector. And I think certainly what we've seen, you know, when you speak to businesses is that after all of the lockdowns, COVID, I think people are really prioritizing experiences over, kind of products when they're deciding how to spend their money. So, we're seeing really strong double-digit growth in terms of our nighttime economy, which is brilliant. But there's no doubt about it. When it comes to retail, we've essentially seen sort of 5-10 years worth of change in 2 years. COVID really has been a catalyst for a dramatic change across the board on that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, where I am in Leeds, Leeds is very different, from what it was at the start of the pandemic. And I mean, my impression is that, you know, there are certain times of the week where it's a lot quieter when I do go in there. I mean, is Newcastle the same, that it's sort of it's very busy at certain times and then perhaps a bit less busy than it used to be at other times of the week? Yeah,
definitely. I think there's a few different really pronounced changes in the city centre. I think the first one is office-based staff. I think most office-based organisations now operate a hybrid type of policy. And lo and behold, I think Mondays and Fridays don't seem to be that popular for office workers. So I think we've definitely seen reduced footfall from our office workers on Mondays and Fridays. And the second one, which I think is quite interesting, is that, say, with your 25-year-old and above or 35-year-old and above, they're definitely coming out in town and spending more money, but they're coming out earlier. So it's, what would have been going out in Newcastle on a Saturday night is that now actually quite often the case. We'll actually go for a day out in Newcastle. We'll start a lot earlier, but we'll be home a lot earlier. So I think people are coming out earlier on the social side of things, and we're definitely missing a lot of office employees on Mondays and Fridays.
That's interesting. So they're starting earlier and finishing earlier. So I'm guessing, is that simply bad news for sort of nightclubs and sort of late night establishments, or are they still doing okay?
It's not bad news. It's just different. I think that's the thing. If you walk up, say, Grey Street, which is perhaps our most prestigious street, beautiful architecture with some of our finest restaurants on it. You walk up that on a Saturday morning, say at 10, 11 o'clock, and it'll be heaving. So it's changed the profile of when people are coming out. But all in all, what actually, hospitality industry and leisure, they're up year on year. And certainly if we're looking, pre-pandemic 2019 as a comparator, I think we're seeing sort of double-digit growth on that side of things. So the pie's got bigger, so to speak. It's just different times.
It sounds like things are going well in Newcastle. But I mean, are there any things that would help Newcastle to thrive even more? Is there anything that you think that policymakers at a national or local level, if they could change that, then perhaps you might be seeing even better numbers? Or is it all? Or are you happy with the sort of landscape that you're operating in at the moment?
Perhaps unsurprisingly, representing 1,400 businesses in the city centre, I'd never be happy. But I think the major thing for us is really what we've seen is sort of 30, 40 years of underinvestment, principally coming via central and local government. And I think the government's levelling up grants, I think, go some way to that, but it still feels very piecemeal. You've got to pitch in on a project by project basis. So I think what would help from a policy perspective is actually having a multi-year agreement in terms of ring fence, CapEx investment for a specific area. I think that would really help the local authority in terms of being able to plan in a more strategic way. And certainly in my time, I've been with NE1 for 14 years, and I've never known a time where the city has received as much public or private sector investment. And the two very much like to move together. The public sector investment matched with private kind of de-risks the proposition for the private sector. So I think if we had a multi-year deal in terms of CapEx investment in public realm, transport, those types of things, I think that would deliver real dividends. And of course, we do have the prospect of an increased combined authority under a new mayor from the 1st of May next year, which in itself brings a multi-year funding to the region. And I think that's really, really positive. I think that would make a big difference. And beyond that, it's not just an issue for Newcastle. It's an issue across the country. There's no two ways about it. I look at the city at the minute, and the amount of investment that is literally just sitting in the planning pipeline is genuinely staggering. If you look at our quayside, we've got in excess of £850 million worth of investment sitting in that kind of planning pipeline. And so I think, if government is really serious about targeting growth, the planning system has to be quicker. You have to provide certainty to the market so that when they purchase a site, they know that within X number of months or X number of years, they're going to be able to start building on that site.
These are developments where the planning application has been lodged and everyone knows what they want to build, but it either hasn't gone through the planning process yet, or it has been approved but it hasn't been built yet.
I would say it's predominantly at the front end of that. So the kind of in the pre-app discussion stages and the planning discussion stages, the planning application stages. And I think that's the frustration. It's just the amount of, I think over time, the planning system, specific policies have been created to address specific needs without necessarily looking at the whole. And therefore, you quite often get planning policies on specific developments that counteract each other. And those issues, no two ways about it, they take time to iron out. and come to a resolution on. So obviously I'm not a planning expert, but I think for me, on the outside looking at that, you see something in planning for 2 to 4 years, if not longer. And I just think it's a wasted opportunity for the city. You know, that £850 million, if we could have that through the planning system within a guaranteed period of time, I think that would be brilliant. And looking at it from first inquiry to actual decision as well, not just looking at from when the planning application's lodged, because there are obviously sort of guidelines on that side of things in terms of determination, but looking at it from first contact all the way through to the decision being granted, I would say.
Now, I'm just going to ask you about a few sort of more specific issues that relate to Newcastle, although I guess they have sort of wider implications as well. So there's a shopping centre, isn't there, called Eldon Square Shopping Centre in the city centre, which I gather has suffered badly during the pandemic. It's lost some big tenants. And I mean, in terms, you were talking earlier about the sort of the mix between retail and other things that people might come into a city centre for. Is the situation with Eldon Square, is that sort of symptomatic of the fact that the city is moving to a different mix of sort of retail versus entertainment and pubs and restaurants and so forth?
Yeah, there's no doubt Newcastle, like every city, is seeing a rapid change in terms of its retail environment. I would say, though, Eldon Square is actually doing really well in terms of vacancy rates. Obviously, you mentioned Debenhams, which is a huge part of Eldon Square. But I think if you look at their vacancy rate, they are very low single-digit numbers. I think the national average is about 14% and about 18% for shopping centres. So it really gives you an idea of how well Eldon Square is doing. And I think that's purely because it's the most dominant in terms of footfall sort of retail centre in northeast England. And in times of, say, flux and uncertainty in the market, you very much see brands running to sort of safe harbours, where they're guaranteed a certain amount of footfall. So Eldon Square on its own, I think, is doing very well and in a strong position. But issues like the Debenhams unit, which you mentioned, there's been a lot of interest in that site, and I do think there will be an announcement made fairly soon on that. There's no two ways about it, though. I think experiences are very much a growth sector for the city. You know, things like escape rooms, axe throwing, all manner of things, pubs that are themed on darts and the like. I think if you're delivering an experience, that's definitely a growth sector at the minute. And beyond that, I would probably say mid-level price point national brands on the restaurant side of things are probably finding it challenging as well. Or local entrepreneurs, I think, are very agile and fleet of foot and very good at capturing niche markets when it comes to food. And as you mentioned before, we've got more restaurants per capita than any other city outside London. There's a really high degree of competition, but the sector is really thriving as a result of that competition. So we are seeing changes, no doubt about it. By and large, I would say the positive changes that needed to happen there are.
I guess the other big sort of political issue in Newcastle, which people outside the city might know about, is the introduction of a clean air zone. So basically a zone in the city into which polluting vehicles will be charged if they enter. Newcastle's not the first place in the country to have one of these. There's one in Bradford, I think one in Sheffield that's going to be that's been introduced as well. Greater Manchester was going to introduce one that covered the entire Greater Manchester region, but that's now not going to happen. So in terms of the things that you're interested in, sort of footfall and people coming into the city centre, has it made any difference, the fact that polluting vehicles are now being charged, or has it actually been a good thing? Because I guess it's going to presumably clean up the air in the city centre.
I think, being blunt about it, I think it could have been absolutely catastrophic for the city. I think the major thing, the major reason why it isn't or hasn't been really bad for the city centre is that private vehicles aren't charged. It is a charge that only applies to commercial vehicles, public transport providers, taxis, heavy goods vehicles, that type of thing. So it hasn't hit people coming in, for office work or people coming in to work, and it hasn't hit customers coming into the city to shop, eat, socialise, that side of things. And I think it was very much when we did our business consultations on that, I expected our businesses would be up in arms about it. You just read the headline and it sounds horrific, doesn't it? But it was really encouraging to see how all of them were like, we need to have better air quality. It was absolutely unanimous from business. So, true to form, the council have offered grants to businesses to upgrade their vehicles, to taxi drivers, that type of thing. So I think by and large, the way it's been implemented in Newcastle is probably the best of a bad situation. We do have the Tyne Bridge and the Central Motorway, and I think that creates issues on its own because I think quite a lot of vehicles are using that as a rat run through the heart of the city, to get from one side of the city to the other. So that traffic doesn't deliver an economic impact, but it delivers a negative impact in terms of our air quality. So I think that will always be a challenge moving forward. But I think the charge will probably help at eliminating the rat run traffic. And beyond that, I think our businesses seem to be adapting very well to the new regime. And I think, again, it's the polluting vehicles are, I think, principally, if you think about 2016 onwards, won't have to pay the charge. So it's only those older commercial vehicles, 2016 and before. So we're getting businesses are investing in their fleet. We're getting better buses. And I think that can only be a positive thing, I think.
I'll ask you one final question, Stephen, which is about Newcastle United. Obviously, the big, such a dominant presence, isn't it? Newcastle United in the city, and obviously they're doing very well at the moment. Just got to the Carabao Cup final, riding high in the league after years of not doing quite so well. I'm interested in whether in terms of your members and what you've observed, whether that makes any difference to a city centre. I know, again, living in Leeds, when Leeds finally got back to the Premier League, local leaders were celebrating and saying it would have a big impact on the city. Does Newcastle United's success, is that good news for you? Is that good news for the businesses in the city centre?
Well, I'll give you two answers. Firstly, as a Newcastle United supporter, it's obviously amazing news. I was distraught we didn't win the cup final, but hey-ho. For the city and our businesses, though, I think there's no two ways about it. It is most definitely delivering a positive economic impact for the city. A good cup run, more home games. Because if you think about it, that stadium, that sits like a fortress on the top of the hill of Newcastle, that's a huge asset for the city that is essentially only used sort of 19 days a season, So the more matches we have at St James's Park, the better economically the city will do. There's no two ways about that. Beyond that, though, obviously we work very closely with the city's property sector and agents, and the number of inquiries we're getting in terms of inward investment, we're doing really, really well. So I think that view of Newcastle United, and as by association, Newcastle as being one of the major sort of European regional capital cities, I think is very good for Newcastle PLC in terms of the brand and awareness.
And you notice a difference in that sort of recently, as opposed to the pre-takeover, pre-success era of Newcastle.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I think we're getting attention from investment funds. Quite simply, we weren't getting the attention of before. And I think we were, in the last couple of months, I think we've been named the top city of our size in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. And I think that is not solely down to Newcastle United, but I think the success of Newcastle United just really raises our profile and puts us on, that top tier of cities if you're looking to relocate, create HQ or something like that. So we have definitely seen an influx of investment inquiries on the back of that, I think. And it's really good for the city. It's a great atmosphere. When Newcastle United's doing well, they do well at the weekend. The city is a better place to be during the week. The office is a better environment, and everybody has a bit of a spring in their step. So, and it's a rarity as well. I think it's quite hard to convey because most football stadiums are actually outside of the city centre. I can actually only think of ourselves maybe in Cardiff, where you have such a big stadium right in the heart of the city centre. And that really does make a difference, I think, in terms of capturing that sort of post-match and pre-match spend in the city. It really does make a difference to the city.
Well, I guess that will only increase if Newcastle can get into the Champions League, but I suppose that is something that a few other teams might have something to say about. So we'll see what happens as the season progresses. But Stephen Patterson of Newcastle NE1, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Rob.